Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this lunchtime panel discussion on who makes the decisions during birth and how. I'm Helen Annandale, a member of the research team, and I'll be chairing this event. I'd like to introduce my colleagues Sian, Beynon-Jones and Clare Jackson. We're all from the Department of Sociology at the university. Our colleague, consultant midwife, Helen Baston, was due to join us for this event, but unfortunately she can't be with us today. So shortly I'm going to hand over to Sian, who'll give a short introduction to our recently completed study on decision-making during birth. After that, we'll be able to look at some study findings. So we're going to take a look at some conversations between midwives and women in labour, and then look at some anonymized videos, some video footage in particular of a live conversation about vaginal examinations during labour. Then we're going to watch a video from the Progress Theatre group who've dramatised some of our findings about pain relief decision-making during labour. So after that, there should be plenty of time for questions and discussion. Just before we start, I must say, or give you a trigger warning. The video we're going to show does show some distress related to pain in labour, which some people may find uncomfortable. So do feel free to leave the call if this may be upsetting for you. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sian, who's going to give us an introduction to the study.
So my aim in this part of the session is to provide you with a brief overview of the project, explaining why we did the research, how we gathered the data, and some of the key things that we found. For decades, government policy about, and healthcare policy as well, about labour and birth in the UK has emphasised that people in labour should be involved in decision-making. Research exploring women's experiences of birth has shown that when they feel more involved in decision-making, they're often more satisfied and experience greater well-being as well as decreased anxiety. However, in spite of evidence that increased feelings of choice and control during decision-making are beneficial, research shows that women often don't feel included in decision-making during birth. In other words, the policy goal of involving women has been difficult to realise in practice. A key issue is that although policy often states that decision-making should involve people in labour, little guidance is provided about how this should actually happen in practice, at the level of the talk that takes place between healthcare providers, people in labour, and also birth partners. And indeed, there's very little research knowledge about these interactions. So this gap in knowledge is why we set out to conduct our research. So we wanted to understand how decision-making takes place in real time through the talk that takes place between healthcare professionals, people in labour, and their birth partners. Are there ways of talking that encourage or discourage women's involvement in decision-making, and what are these? In this session today, we want to use our findings to explain why we think the detail of talk during labour and birth matters. In our study, we audio or video recorded 37 women's labours across 2 midwife-led units so that we could see how these interactions unfolded in real time during labour. All the people in the recordings were asked for their consent to take part, and the women in labour were in control of when the camera was on or when it was off. The research team wasn't present at all, just the cameras. Midwife-led units are sites where birth is managed by midwives rather than by doctors. Midwife-led birth involves labours where women have been assessed as being at low risk for complications. There's many decisions to be made, even in low-risk birth. For example, choices around pain relief, vaginal examinations, and management of the delivery of the placenta. We analysed our recordings using conversation analysis, which we're going to be referring to in this session as CA. This is the leading method for understanding how talk works in social interaction. It's based on the understanding that talk is used to do things in social interactions. For example, to request things, to complain, to thank someone, etc. There's also rules and patterns about how talk works. For example, the ways that a decision is initiated makes a big difference to the types of response that is possible. So if we can consider, for example, the difference between whether a health professional pronounces that something's about to happen, I'm just going to do X, versus framing a decision as a choice that requires a response from a patient. Would you prefer X or Y? These are very different ways of initiating a decision. The first frames the decision as something that's going to happen and that requires no involvement from the patient. The second requires an active decision and a response from the patient. We looked at recordings of labour using CA to explore who was initiating decisions during labour and birth, and also how they were doing this. What we found was that midwives often lead decision-making towards what's thought to be clinically needed. They started most decisions in ways that asked for women's consent, but they didn't invite them to take part in a discussion. This resonates with other research in this area, which has demonstrated midwives' concern with clinical risk and concern for compliance with clinical guidelines. When we asked women about their experiences of birth following labour in postnatal surveys, we found that they were generally very satisfied with their care. Also, although we did find that midwives didn't overall invite women to take part in discussion, there was quite a lot of differences depending on the type of decision that was being made. So, for example, women were more likely to be invited to participate in decision-making during the third stage of labour in relation to decisions about the delivery of the placenta and the cutting of the cord. We found that women generally didn't initiate decisions themselves, with the exception of pain relief, where they were quite active in making requests. Pain relief decisions were long and quite complex decisions, and we're going to come back to look at these later through a dramatised video. I'm now going to hand over to Claire, who's going to use an example from our data about vaginal examinations to demonstrate why it matters to study the fine detail of talk during labour.
Thank you, Sian. So in a moment, we'll be looking at a single decision as it actually took place about a vaginal examination. But first, I want to say something about vaginal examinations more broadly. Next slide, please. Vaginal examinations are used routinely during labour to assess the dilation of a labouring person's cervix. So amongst other things, so vaginal examinations are also used for checking that the waters are intact or feeling for the baby's position. But during labour, as you probably know, the cervix dilates from closed, so 0 centimetres, to 10 centimetres to allow for vaginal delivery of the baby. So the number of centimetres of dilation then is taken as a measure of progress of labour. In the UK, vaginal examinations are often, but not necessarily, conducted on an admission to a unit to confirm the onset of labour, and then regularly after that, every 4 hours during the first stage of active labour. In fact, National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, or NICE guidelines, these are the guidelines that healthcare practitioners refer to inform their practices, suggest that vaginal examination should be offered every 4 hours, which implies that the labouring person should be given a choice. As we will see in our dataset, however, decisions about vaginal examinations did not tend to be set up in this way. Importantly, the 4-hour schedule does not kick in until women are considered to be in active labour. So this is until they're at least 4 centimetres dilated and contracting regularly. So women who have not reached 4 centimetres and are not contracting regularly are deemed to be in what's called the latent phase. Women in the latent phase are not offered regular vaginal examinations and in fact often sent home. This lack of a regular schedule of vaginal examinations is a matter that both women in labour and midwives are sensitive to, because it can signal to a woman that she's not thought to be in labour, which can be upsetting and confusing. Next slide, please, Helen. Thank you. As I said earlier, despite NICE guidelines suggesting that vaginal examination should be offered every 4 hours, in our dataset, midwives tended to initiate decisions about vaginal examinations using pronouncements. So that is in a way that suggests that a decision has already been made and that vaginal examination will happen, is going to happen, or needs to happen. And an example here on the slide. Yeah, you'll see here an example on the slide where the current midwife, naming an early midwife, says midwife, so that's the midwife's name. Midwife said she examined you at 8:40, so I'll examine you about 12:40. So here, the midwife is setting up the examination as something that will happen at 12:40. And in this way, the decision is presented in such a way that it does not explicitly seek the woman's involvement. There's no real discussion asked for here. It's important to note, however, that explicit consent for the examination was always sought for. It was always sought. So, but particularly at the moment the examination was about to start. So often, so women would be positioned, and obviously they're consenting in going along with the positioning. But there was always something like okay or ready at the moment the examination was actually going to start. So vaginal examinations are treated as routine, not just in terms of the guidelines, but also in the way they are discussed during labour, the way that the discussions take for granted that they will occur. However, we're going to look at a decision in which the midwife does appear to make the examination optional. And in a moment, we'll play the anonymised video and talk. We'll play the anonymised video and we'll talk through our analysis. But first, let me introduce you to the people in the video. Next slide, please. This extract features a labouring woman. It's actually her first time labour, and we've named her, but this isn't her real name. We've named her Gabby, and a senior midwife. And you'll also see a student midwife in the background, but she does not participate in the discussion we're about to see. But Gabby has been experiencing irregular contractions for some hours, suggesting that she's not yet in active labour. She had been admitted to the unit the night before and had become distressed when the vaginal examination suggested that her cervix was not yet opening. That is, she was not considered to be in labour. We'll see in the video that the senior midwife is preparing to take blood from Gabby's left arm. However, our interest in this extract relates to the decision about conducting the vaginal examination. As Ellen mentioned earlier, the video we're about to see comes from an actual moment in labour, so may be triggering or upsetting for some people. It's important to note that we're not going to watch the vaginal examination itself. This is the discussion, making a decision about when the next vaginal examination will happen. The video has been anonymised, so you'll see an outline drawing and blurred faces, and it will also sound a little odd because we've changed the voices. I've inexpertly added verbatim words to help you make sense of what's happening. Yeah, it doesn't work very well, but hopefully you will be able to hear and read along with what's happening. After the video, we'll take a more detailed look at what was actually said. So next slide to play the video, please, Ellen.
I've got a little bit of spotting. I'm assuming that's just because
from the examination. Yeah, she would have kind of stretched the cervix.
Yeah, she did a bit of speak like as well.
So that was a half eight. So I could, if you want to, examine it again at half 12.
Yeah,
she'll show you significant contractions have gone off and it'll be better.
Yeah,
to wait. The problem with going too soon is if it's the same, then it kind of just, sometimes it's better to wait a bit longer.
Yeah.
Once you're up the bar and walking again, upright positions, the head and the cervix.
I don't think I'm crying as much as
no, it's fine.
Last time I was like, what am I doing now?
No, you're going to be fine. And just stress isn't good for labour either.
No, I think it's just so tired.
Lots of good hormones that that kind of keep contractions through. If it's being tired, you're wandering up and you're really wandering up.
Should be 8. Yeah, I was like, it should be 10. It should be 15.
And I'll just make some brief analytic comments about this extract. So I just wanted to say something about how the decision kind of arises in the interaction. So the decision does not, thank you. So the decision doesn't just appear from nowhere. It's topically related to the discussion at the beginning of the extract that we've just seen, where Gabby reports spotting, so it's light bleeding from the vagina, which the midwife says was due to the previous examination in which that midwife had attempted to stretch the cervix, or as Gabby puts it, did a bit of a sweep. So with the vaginal examinations in the air, as it were, the midwife opts to tackle the issue of the timing for the next vaginal examination. So the midwife initiates the decision saying, so that was at 8:30, so I could, if you wanted me to, examine you again at 12:30. She says it, she doesn't say it quite like that, so I'll come back to that, but that's how this decision gets initiated. So in doing so, she orients to this 4-hourly schedule, and we can note the use of so to mark 12:30 as an upshot of the previous time, 8:30. So this is one way that clinical guidelines show up in these interactions. The decision is produced conditionally on what Gabby wants and as something that she could do, not going to do. Note the could and the wanted. I'm speculating, but I think it would have come across differently if it was, I can, if you want me to, examine you again at 12:30. The contrast, I think, is that can, wanted conveys a more definitively proposed course of action than could and wanted, but I think that's for further research. Now, the transcript is a little hard to read because of the symbols used in conversation analysis. So these try to convey something about the way something is said and not just what was said. Now, don't worry about all the symbols, but it might be useful to know that the .hhh on that third line there shows that the speaker took an audible in-breath. And then that 0.5 is half a second silence. And then the H is on the end of could is an audible out breath, almost a sigh. So it sounds like could. So there's that breathiness. And then so the breathiness with the in-breath and the out-breath and the silence, all features of delay, which work to show that there's some delicacy in what the midwife is saying. So Gabby agrees quite straightforwardly, simply saying, yeah. So the decision now has been initiated by the midwife and agreed to by Gabby. So at this point, they could just move on to something else. The decision is made and the vaginal examination will happen at 12:30, but this is not what happens. So the midwife does not orient to Gabby's agreement at all, and instead expands the decision-making sequence, keeping it open by saying, it's your choice, which may seem odd after the woman has apparently made a choice. It's worth remembering, as I've said elsewhere, across our dataset, offers and explicit choice are not typical in vaginal examination decisions, so this is unusual. The midwife continues with an if-then formatted turn, that it goes across the lines, but she says across these lines, if you think that the contractions have gone off and it would be better to wait, then I'm happy to do that. Thereby providing the grounds for Gabby to decline having the vaginal examination at 12:30. In other words, the contractions have slowed and there's unlikely to have been progress within the 4 hours. Which is implicit in the better to wait, and this is later unpacked. The midwife conveys these grounds to delay the vaginal examination as coming from Gabby's perspective. That is, she does not say, I think the contractions have gone off and it would be better to wait, from her own position, but it's hard to hear it as anything other than her own stance. The I'm happy to do that adds to the sense of optionality for Gabby. But it's also a kind of nod to the expected schedule, that the midwife would be okay not to conduct the vaginal examination despite the expected 4-hourly schedule. So this 4-hourly schedule, as I said earlier, only kicks in when women are in active labour. So this is delicate. It conveys the midwife's understanding that Gabby is still in the latent phase. Sorry, I do have more to say then. I guess, notably, Gabby appears to reverse her previous decision, saying, yeah, why not? Yeah, whatever you think. So she's agreed to it, and now she agrees to delaying. So the midwives' words are not lost on Gabby. The midwife then unpacks the reasons for delaying the next vaginal examination. So she says explicitly going too soon, and the idea that, you know, the outcome may be disheartening, and that if it's disheartening, you know, there's a possible negative impact of distress on labour, all of which, of course, Gabby has direct experience of, having become distressed the night before. So all of this suggests that the senior midwife can tell without a vaginal examination that Gabby is unlikely to be in active labour. We might want to ask whether this is a shared decision. I think it's complicated. On the one hand, the midwife does set up the decision in a way that allows for what Gabby wants. It's her choice. But the way the midwife continues to make clear that there are obvious grounds to delay the vaginal examination sets up an expected response of agreeing to the delay. What we can say is the only other occasions we see vaginal examination decisions initiated in a way that provides a labouring woman with choice is during the latent phase, when midwives suspect that there's not been much progress and are working to delay the vaginal examination. This finding resonates with broader findings about the use of offers in other medical contexts, where offers tend to be declined because they are hearable as decisions that are based on what patients want rather than what's clinically necessary. For example, I was part of a study examining consultations in neurology, and when doctors said something like, "Do you want me to send you for a scan?" patients tended to decline. Taken together then, the precise ways that choices are offered can, paradoxically, narrow the optionality afforded to patients. We now move to introduce our work with the Progress Theatre. Thank you. So our midwife colleague, Helen Baston, was due to present this part of the session, but unfortunately, as Ellen said, is not able to join us today. So I will continue. Thank you. So this section will introduce our use of drama in disseminating research findings and facilitating discussions about practice. In fact, we were encouraged to use drama by our funder, the National Institute for Health Research, because one product of our data, as they pointed out, are literal scripts of interactions that took place during labour. The presentation you're about to see was produced and acted by members of the Progress Theatre, who are all midwives, and present often improvised scenarios relating to maternity care. They use drama in an intentional way to provoke discussion. And so just a warning that in what you're about to see, the performance may be emotional for some people to watch. Before we get to the performance, I'll just say a little more about the inspiration behind Progress Theatre. So Progress Theatre is based on the goals of Forum Theatre, which was founded by the Brazilian theatre director Augusto Boal, to prompt discussion of often difficult issues. And typically, Forum Theatre is live and permits audience participation to halt the performance, to ask questions, or to change events. And Progress Theatre adapts Forum Theatre as an effective and innovative way of translating research findings around maternity care. So following Forum Theatre, these would normally be live performances, but due to the pandemic, along with everything else, we could not use Progress Theatre in this way. So instead, the theatre group recorded a video for us to present at conferences and workshops. So specifically, we worked with the Progress Theatre to produce a dramatisation of our findings in relation to fetal monitoring decisions and to present a theatrical version of a single pain relief decision. And monitoring decisions are the most frequently occurring decision in our data set, because following clinical guidelines, fetal monitoring typically occurs every 15 minutes during the first stage of active labour and every 5 minutes in the second stage. And the video gives a sense of how this frequency might be experienced. The pain relief decision we'll see dramatised is the longest one we have in our data set, in which the labouring woman seeks opiate pain relief, specifically diamorphine, on multiple occasions over about 2 hours. So opiates are strong painkillers delivered by injection into the muscles. They can make people sleepy, and that includes the baby because they cross the placenta. The video uses the same words and phrases that were uttered in reality. Obviously, we're not going to watch it for 2 hours. It's a much shortened version, but it's the same words and phrases that were actually used. It's important to say, however, that the identities of the real participants are protected, so names have been changed. At the end of the video, we'll hear the labouring woman's reflections, and this is based on what she actually wrote in her postnatal survey.
So you're doing really well, that's fantastic. You're definitely in labour. So I'm going to explain some of the things that I need to do during the course of that. So I'll do regular observations just to make sure that you're well. I also need to listen into the baby. So I'll be doing that every 15 minutes for a minute after a contraction. And then as it moves into the next stage, when you're pushing or fully dilated, I'll need to listen in every 5 minutes for a minute after a contraction, obviously until the baby's born. But if I'm worried, you know, if at any point I'm a bit concerned about the baby's heartbeat, I will suggest that you have continuous monitoring, which is the machine over here, and it's got straps that we'll put around your tummy, and that gives us a, you know, a nice continuous recording of the heartbeat, so we can act quickly if anything's going wrong. As I said, I'll be around and we'll be doing that on a regular basis. Is that okay with you?
I'll have a listen in now while I'm here.
I'll just listen in.
Just going to listen to baby.
Can I just listen in?
Am I all right to...
All right to have a listen in, please.
To baby? Can you just sit up for me while I have a little listen in?
I need to listen to your baby now. Lean back for me now.
Nina,
No,
can I
lean
listen to
back.
the baby?
I need to listen in.
Can I just have a quick
Am I all
listen?
right just to listen in to baby?
I'll have a little listen in now while I'm here. Just listen in. Just lean back for me now so I can listen in. Just going to listen to
I'll
baby.
have a little listen in
Can I
while
just
I'm
listen
here.
in?
I'm just going to have a listen in after the next one, okay?
All right, just have a listen again.
I'll have a listen in now while I'm
Yes.
here.
I'll-
Can you just sit up for
I'm
me
just
while
gonna
I
have
a
another
little
listen in.
Listening in to baby.
Now just have a quick listen.
Gonna listen in to your baby now,
I'll have a little
sweetheart.
listen in now while I'm here. Oh, great.
That's fine, Rachel. Whatever you want. Do you want me to examine you then? Just in case you're ready to push. It's up to you.
I'm really struggling now.
I know. The other midwife said you were struggling a little bit. But you're doing so well, lovey. Really using that gas well. Just keep breathing in and out. In and out. Oh, that's so good. Try and go deeper. Big, deep breaths. Keep going. Deeper. Deeper, Rachel.
I just want some diamorphine.
Whatever you want, lovey. We can get you out if you want. I can examine you. But if you have diamorphine and the baby's born soon after, I just have to tell you, it can be difficult for the baby. It might be slow to start breathing and it might need a bit of support, you know, might just be a good rub down and perhaps a bit of oxygen.
Oh, so is it really dangerous then?
Well, not necessarily. Lots of women have it and the babies are fine. They come out kicking and screaming, but sometimes they are sleepy and, well, but it's up to you. Let me just have a little listen to the baby for now. Keep breathing, that's good. It's all good.
I think I need something else, just you know, just help me.
I know. That's just transition, Rachel, that's normal. I just need to do some observations. I haven't done any for a while. Okay. That's good, all done. You're doing really well, all normal. How are you feeling now? I just have to go and answer that, Rachel. It might be important. One to go. It's just 2 medical students. They'd like to come in and see the birth. What do you think? Oh, okay, I'll just say no. Just keep breathing deeply, Rachel. Use the gas. Whenever you have a contraction now, I want you to breathe deeply on the gas. Through the contraction.
Concentrate through the contraction.
I can't.
And then you can rest.
I don't want to anymore. I don't want to. Oh, I want some diamorphine.
I know. Rachel, I just need to pop out for a minute and check your blood results. Just in case something happens later, I need to know. I won't be a minute. Press the buzzer if you need me. Phil, press the buzzer.
I just want to get out. I want some diamorphine. She's not bringing it.
You've got to trust him, love.
Yeah.
Cheer up, Rachel. That's better. Yeah, keep going. Keep going. That's it. That's it. In and out.
Where's she gone?
She's just got to check your bloods.
I've been saying forever.
Shall I sing to you? Look at the stars and how they shine for you, and everything you do, and it was all yellow.
I want some diamorphine.
Yeah, I know.
Phil. No.
Keep going, love. Keep going.
I've been asking for it for ages.
Trust them. They know what they're doing. Do you want some water?
No.
Shall I sing to you again?
No.
All good. Good blood results. I don't think you're going to be long at all now, Rachel. There's just a bag of waters in front of that baby's head. And when they go, you'll just have your baby.
Well, can you break my waters then?
Well, that's entirely up to you. I'm not going to deny you anything, but we wouldn't normally break your waters without a clinical reason, Rachel, and I don't think we have one.
Well, I had them broken last time.
You're making such good progress. And the baby's happy. You're doing really well with that gas, really well. Well done, Rachel. Just keep going. Breathe now, concentrate. Breathe. Oh, I can see the baby's head, Rachel. Rachel, I can see the baby's head. I knew it wouldn't be long. I told you the baby was just behind those waters.
Is it too late for some drugs then?
Oh, you should be so proud of yourself. You thought you couldn't do it, and you've done it. You're doing it. Just a few more pushes.
Yeah, I think it went really well. You know, she had the baby in the pool and she seemed happy and the baby was healthy. It was all nice and calm, and yeah, I think it went really well. Well, yeah, I mean, I know she asked for diamorphine. She asked for diamorphine a few times, but it's not good to just give out diamorphine like sweeties. It isn't good, and you know, and we've had conversations in the office about it. You know, it's not a really good midwife will support a woman through, you know, without having drugs, and will stay with her, and you know, it's a good thing, isn't it? And also the diamorphine can have an effect on the baby. You know, the baby could be born really sleepy, and then that's going to affect feeding. I know that. I've been to all the workshops. You know, and if the baby then doesn't feed straight away, then might need top ups. You know, that's an issue. And then if it's like really close to the birth, then it doesn't help the mum with the pain at all. And then she has the baby, and then she just wants to sleep. Well, then what about bonding? That'd be really bad, wouldn't it? So I know she was asking, but then, if I've had to get her out the pool, and then if she got out the pool, she's standing up, and then what if she suddenly wants to push, and then she wants to push standing up, and she just has the baby on the floor, and I'm there, and I'm not ready, you know, my trolley's over there, what? So, you know, and then if she then sits on the toilet, we know that happens, I know that happens, if she's sitting on the toilet, I think she's nearly there, if she's sitting on the toilet, she'll definitely want to push, and then she can't have the baby on the toilet, can she? She'll have to get her on her knees, and then what if the baby comes out floppy, and then the doctors have to come, and then they come in and they go, why is she on the toilet floor? And then what do we do then? You know, it's like, it makes me, you know, it's all of those things things are kind of going on, and then, you know, what about, and anyway, you know, if she wants diamorphine, then I'll probably have to examine her, and then that's not 4 hours, and the guidelines say every 4 hours, you know, the guidelines are really important, they're there for a purpose, and then if something went wrong, they'd say, well, why did you do that? They'll look at my notes and they go, why did you examine her only 2 hours? So I think, you know, we did a really good thing. You know, it was good that she didn't have the diamorphine and she had a lovely birth in the pool.
I don't think that the midwife in the later stages of my labour was really listening to me. It was fine. It was positive. I did ask for increased pain relief at about 6:30 a.m. and I asked repeatedly after that. And it wasn't until about 2 hours later that the midwife actually had a discussion with me about why that wasn't advisable at that stage. I just felt frustrated, really, that no one was listening to me.
We hope from what you've heard from Sian and particularly from Clare and our findings, we've given you a flavour of some of the results from our study. Anyway, let's move on. We've got a number of really interesting questions for our speakers. I'm going to take, first of all, a question from Jess. Excuse me just a moment. And Jess asks, how can we raise awareness of coercion amongst pregnant women? Jess says, I feel this is a really, I guess, important issue and can potentially lead to trauma. So Sian, could I refer this question to you?
Thanks, Helen, and thanks, Jess, for the question. You're right, that's a really, really important issue. And I think the idea of raising awareness among pregnant women is really interesting as well, and something that we've been thinking about in relation to our findings is how best to kind of disseminate them and engage pregnant women with those, and that's something we're going to be giving a lot of thought to over the coming months. The project is recently completed. In terms of, I guess, the specifics of our data, it was quite interesting that we saw that coercion wasn't something that was specifically mentioned by women. So we did a postnatal survey after the births that we looked at, and women were generally quite highly satisfied with their care. So we can only really speak about the sample of women that we included in the research. But I think definitely what our data shows is the complexity of decision making and choice. So for the example that that Clare looked at, even something that looks like a choice isn't actually always it doesn't always work like a choice in practice. So I think that the research probably has quite a lot to say about that, and how how those interactions are actually working, that we do need to find a way of engaging pregnant women with. Thank you.
Thank you, Sian. Next, we've got a couple of questions, or two questions that ask about vaginal examinations. So I'll put both of those questions before inviting a response. So Catherine says, recommendation 1.45 on vaginal examination during assessment in labour in the NICE, National Institute for Clinical Excellence guidelines, is very clear about how to conduct a vaginal examination, including explaining the reason and obtaining informed consent. Catherine goes on to say she was a lay member of the 2014 NICE committee that drafted recommendation, the following recommendation: not the 4-hourly ongoing assessment recommendation for established first stage, which we had no evidence of need to change clinically, which gives no how to the detail. So Catherine now goes on to say, so this real life example that we've just given that Clare spoke to is fascinating. And an anonymous comment from one of you says, in the situation with Gabby and the midwife about the vaginal examination, could it not be interpreted, especially if you don't know the details of the 4-hour guideline and Gabby consent to, but that the senior midwife doesn't have the time, can't be bothered to do this as they should? Could I refer those comments to yourself, Clare?
Yeah, and I'm going to include the the first question there from an anonymous attendee as well. So I'll try and take all three of these together. So the first one is an anonymous person has said, I agree that the labouring person should be included in the decision making, but this is making out vaginal checks every 4 hours is problematic. What's the problem with having vaginal checks every 4 hours? Okay, so no, so we're not assuming that it's problematic. So we don't want to start from the basis that vaginal examinations are problematic, but that there should be, as Catherine has said, a discussion about why they're indicated, you know, how often they will happen. So rather, why they're indicated, which doesn't tend to happen, right? So what we see in our data set, at least, is that what happens, sometimes these conversations take place on, you know, being admitted to the unit. We'll see midwives say, so I will be listening into baby every 15 minutes. We'll be doing vaginal examinations every 4 hours. So that they do it in that kind of, they're referring implicitly to the guidelines in terms of how often things will occur. I have to say they always seek consent. They're not there. I think they take for granted that women know why monitoring happens, why vaginal examinations happen. They don't really say why they're doing that. I think they take for granted that women already know. But yeah, I've lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? But yes, so vaginal examination decisions take place over a long period of time. So I showed you the beginning of a decision, actually. So what we saw was a decision around delaying a vaginal examination. But generally, what midwives do will say, you know, so-and-so examined you 4 hours ago, so I will examine you and then they'll say, so I'm going to examine you in 30 minutes. And then they'll say, right, I'm going to examine you now. So these things happen over a period of time. Very often women agree to these examinations. We don't see much resistance to it at all. And then consent to actually begin the vaginal examination happens consistently. We did not see a case where the actual consent for the examination to begin was not asked for. In terms of what I think is going on in the Gabby decision, this is a senior midwife. She's very experienced. She knows that Gabby has become extremely distressed the night before. And I think what she's done, I don't think it's about her not feeling bothered about doing it. What I would say across all our data is that midwives follow the guidelines. They're not trying to get out of following the guidelines. If the midwife considered that that Gabby was now in active labour, I'm pretty confident she would have recommended the vaginal examination. The fact that she works to delay it is because I think she's trying to prevent Gabby becoming distressed again. For the reasons she goes on to say, she says, if, distress isn't good for labour, or, all those hormones, the distress hormones actually work against the good hormones, as she calls them, for labour. So I don't think I think she's trying to consider what's good for Gabby's labour rather than trying to get out of doing the examination, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Claire. We do have some other questions about vaginal examinations, but because of time, I'm going to move on to look at the, or to put forward the questions about pain relief from the dramatised video. So anonymous attendee has said, can you think of any other medical situations where someone would be in significant amounts of pain and denied pain management? She goes on to say, or he or she goes on to say, it's horrible that this continues to happen. Is there anything being done to educate people and to help women who are giving birth? Sian, would you like to take that?
Thanks, Helen. Yes, I agree that it is really, really distressing, and I think the video, particularly the dramatisation, makes it really clear the distress and that situation. I think Catherine in the chat actually has noted that there's a number of campaign organisations who are working around kind of women's rights during birth and issues like that one. So AIMS and NCT and birth rights, she mentions. And as she mentions, there is, you know, these have been issues that I suppose have been, they're not new in our data. They've been going on, sadly, for a long time and are kind of widely recognised. So there's clearly still a lot more to be done, as the person who posed the question notes that this is still ongoing. I think something that we found in our data and that we try and highlight in the video is the detentions, perhaps for midwives who are working in these situations, where they're dealing, and somebody else has commented on this on the chat, that they're dealing with a lot of kind of imperatives themselves around risk and safety as well. So I think what our data shows is sometimes the difficult positions that midwives are working in and how this can lead to interactional situations that then become very difficult and distressing. Would you agree with that, Claire?
So yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, it is. I agree. It's quite hard to watch, and it was hard to watch in reality. This particular pain relief decision was quite difficult. Midwives, of course, it's about I think where the midwife's position is the potential risk to the baby. So the baby being sleepy following birth, if that pain relief diamorphine is given too close to the moment of birth, and the baby, then the pain relief will still be in the baby's system, and they're working to avoid that. So there's all kinds of questions about, you know, whether that kind of do I want to say prioritizing the baby over the woman? Maybe that's too strong, but there's I can see it's not straightforward to grant things like diamorphine because of the impact on both mother and baby. I have to say, in early labour, diamorphine or opiate pain relief was sometimes recommended to relax women. Like sometimes women were asking for pain relief in early labour and getting it because of this timing issue. We do have a woman though who was given diamorphine and then progressed very quickly from 5 centimetres to 10 centimetres and ended up having a sleeping baby in any case, because labour isn't linear. You don't progress from 0 to 10 centimetres in a linear way. So it's not always, you know, it's not always clear when somebody will progress and how many hours before, you know, they imagine that second stage will happen. So yeah, I think there's a whole range of conflicting tensions for midwives and for women.
Thank you, Claire. And those comments of conflicting tensions and women's awareness of capacity to make choices and so on and so forth are really important issues that have been raised that we don't have time to go into in the Q&A. In the last few minutes, I thought I'd just follow up on a few kind of more informational responses. So Catherine has also asked about whether we're in touch with AIMS, NCT, Birth Rights, RCM, who've done loads of work on informed decision making and coercion for decades. Yes, certainly. There's really a lot of really important research on this topic out there. What's unique about our study is not necessarily the results that we've found, because I think in many ways they do endorse what we already know, unfortunately, in a number of cases in terms of the research findings. But they are unique, as far as we're aware, in showing how this really happens, how this actually happens in real time through the video recordings that we have and the capacity to do the conversation analysis. So that's where we feel our contribution lies. And yes, birthrights certainly have been involved in particular as part of our study steering committee, and we will be in touch and disseminating results to other organizations. Someone has asked whether the results of the study have been published. They shortly will be published by the National Institute of Health Research. There's a 50,000 word report. If anyone would like to see that, please do get in touch with us or email us at the Department of Sociology, University of York. If you just go to that web page, you'll find our email addresses there, and we can let you know when the report's available and send a copy on to you. And just very finally, in the last minute or so, Jane has asked or said really interesting findings. How did the midwives and women feel about being recorded? Were they asked to participate in advance? Yes, everyone was advised to had the opportunity to participate or not participate in the study, both midwives and women, and they knew that they were being recorded. The women and their birth partners had control of the cameras and could position those and switch those on and off. So there's a lot of detail about the ethical compliance for the study and the practicalities of the methodology in the final report that should soon be available. So just in closing, thank you for joining us today for this event. From the comments, it sounds like a lot of you have found the research really interesting, which is great to hear. And you can, of course, watch this event back on the Festival of Ideas YouTube channel, which will be posted very, very shortly. So yes, we very much hope that you'll continue to be engaged with the York Festival ideas for the rest of this week, and in the future do check out the festival website.